was your involvement in the 2015 formation of Access Party?
So I wasn't actually involved in the formation of Access Party at all. When I started, or basically when Access Party kind of rolled around that first spring of 2015, I had started at UF the fall of 2014, and so that was still my freshman year. And so I got involved with everything actually through this group that was called the Freshman Leadership Council, and they were very systemy. Right, there was lots of like it's one where different houses have a certain number of slots. So like AD Pi always has a slot in FLC, and like Theta Chi always has a slot that they can pick like their freshmen to get into it. And like I don't exactly know why I got in. I think they probably regretted it because I was like very not interested in the system stuff, and that's when I started to like understand like how politics worked at UF. Um, and so then I was like, wow, this is kind of annoying. And I had a few friends in FLC that we were all like, wow, this is really silly. And then yeah, then Access Party came around and we just kind of slated and just like decided to try it out. And yeah, and then I slated with Access and was kind of there from the beginning, but I wasn't there before they announced. All the like knowledge that I have of basically that 30 or 60-day period pre-announcing that the slating intention was just from good friends with Al Beecher, and then yeah, I know a lot of the Access folks, and then later I was involved in like leadership within Access, and so I learned a lot more of the lore after that.
Interesting. So you were very early on in your UF career and you just slated with Access. What was your reaction to Jocelyn Padron Racine's victory, and why do you think Access won that spring in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a bunch of different potential explanations. I think it's really hard for a non-system party to win an executive ticket when they have been around for a while um, because the message of all indie parties very often comes down to let's change something up, let's do something different. Um, and so the one of, in my mind, one of the big reasons why that Access Party had the opportunity to win is that it started in the spring and it was the first semester. The other part is that there was a real sentiment in 2015 of the communities, mainly BSU, HSA, and AASU, that they were underrepresented in student government. And basically, the way that it usually works, as far as I understand it, like cyclically, is that the system had gotten powerful enough that they felt like they didn't have to give as much to the communities. They didn't have to give as many seats in Senate. They didn't have to give as many blue key taps. They didn't have to give as many, just like favors in order to for them to like support the system party. And so then the communities got really frustrated, and that is why you saw Jocelyn and Nick especially, but also Kevin Doan were all really big community members. They were, like leaders within HSA, BSU, and AASU. And it's not an accident that you had one from each community. And so it's that combination of, yes, you had the community sport, and then you actually had a set of, there was an indie party that was going to get started that was much more of a like traditional indie party, where it was like that no system connection, no communities connection. They were just trying to start their own party. And so there was that party. I forget exactly what they were gonna call themselves, but originally it was going to be three parties slated that were going to slate the like true indie party, the like communities party, and then you had Swamp. It was called Swamp back then, I'm pretty sure. But then the two indie parties came together and were like, because the true indie party actually didn't have enough, they didn't know who they were going to put up for their like president, VP, and treasurer roles, and that was already locked down by Access, and so everyone was just like, hey, why don't we slate together and just like combine and form one, which ended up working like really well. So I think that's one of the like some of the big reasons that Access successfully won. You also had a lot of just like really remarkably good talent. Um, yeah, just like remarkably good talent that was just around and like interested in indie movements. I mean, you had Michael Christ and Matt Heck who were really good at organizing and figuring things out and like were also just like good leaders. You had Elle Beecher, who is like a really good marketing person. And so the fact that she was, you just like randomly had these people that in a very short amount of time would be like just outlandishly good at their job at doing marketing for free for the small student government campaign was rare. Definitely rare in the kind of like a lot of stars ended up aligning at the same time. And I think if you missed a couple of those big ones, then you're going to come out a few hundred votes short and end up losing.
All right. So you mentioned that a lot of the people in Access Party were the members of the communities who sort of were unhappy with the system. So would
Yeah.
you characterize Access as more of a coalition of indies and defectors, or would you say it was primarily defectors from the systems with some indies sprinkled in? So was it an equal relationship, or was it primarily system?
I would say it very much depends who you ask, and it very much depends how much you like how systemy you consider the communities. And different communities at different times are more and less systemy. Um, and so that like very much changes my answer. But I would say it's the nicest way to categorize it is a coalition of indies and defectors. Anyone that goes into it and is more on the indie side will basically have the perception that, oh, this was just some people that like were just leaving the system, but they always wanted to go back. And a part of that is true. Like there are like block leaders on the community side that intentionally said, hey, we're gonna like join an indie party so that like the system will kind of respect us again and will take like our voice more seriously. And so then yeah, the answer is it really depends. I prefer to think about it from the coalition of indies and defectors, just from the set of people that I met and like was around. I would say a very small percentage of them were just like, oh yeah, I'm really just a part of the system, but then like, you know, yeah, I don't actually care about this indie stuff. So I thought everyone that I met in the Access, almost everyone that I met in the Access Party was relatively or at least like pretty genuine about their desires for being kind of like anti-system.
All right. So moving on to the later part of Access Party, why do you believe that Access sort of fell apart after spring 2016?
Yeah, I think independent parties that already have a history with the system and the system has a reason to pick off like powerful people within the party uh, are more likely to die younger. There'll be like a brighter flash in the pan, but it is harder to have a sustained movement. With the true indie people, the system is basically never going to go to the true indie people and be like, hey, if I give you like a a blue key tap, will you, you know, like Slade in the Senate for me or something? Because all of them would instantly like take a screenshot of that and post it on Twitter because they're more interested in clout, like and and like the joke than anything else than like a blue key tap. Like no one gives a shit about blue key. Like so because of that, like Access Party was kind of uniquely set up where it's easier to or it's like really hard to have a really sustained movement for a party that like Access, which is like the coalition of indies and defectors. I also think that the system did a really good job of recognizing how serious the loss was and changing their strategy or implementing the like time old strategy of change the name, add some more people, and like go at it again. And that strategy like very, very often works. And so they kind of executed on that like pretty successfully. Um, and yeah, and then they were able to woo the communities back really quickly. And we're just like, and before 2015, you basically never saw a member of the communities on the like as the president, as like UF president. That was just never an option. It was like, oh, maybe once every 2 or 3 years you might get a treasurer or a VP slot, and that was like how it went. And so then post access, like I mean, you've been around, but post access, the world is just entirely different. Where you cannot have an all white slate anymore. That's like not something that is like manageable for a political party at UF to do, because you'll just lose. And then you very often see members of the communities like being put up for the like presidency roles.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think like every student body vice president and treasurer tends to be from the communities in the
Yeah,
system party. It's very interesting to see that that's sort of access is that origin. Um, as
I mean the
well.
thing is, I would love to see all of that, right? Where it's like I don't 100% know that is true, but all I know is like in from the years 2010 to 2015 or somewhere around there, you very rarely saw two members of the communities as like VP and treasurer, and you never saw like a member of their community, like almost never, if not never, saw a member of the community as the president.
To get to this idea of defectors, um, what do you know the benefits that were sort of given to sort of people who were former system defectors to go back to Impact after it rebranded? Like, did they have? Do you like know any details about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, like the easiest example is like Kishan Patel, right? Where he was a member of Access, and he was a like a sophomore senator or an engineering senator. I forget exactly what it was, but yeah, he was in the Senate, and then the ASU was the current like communities block leader at the time. And so then when they made that decision, they were like, okay, he's going to be the treasurer for the next spring, as a part of as a part of switching over. And yeah, so then he was there, and he was the treasurer. That was like the easiest example. Um, but there's like kind of a whole. I remember in the 2016 year, basically the communities got whatever they wanted. Spring of 2015, 2016 or something. It was just like you could double or triple the number of blue key taps in a year that you would normally get. You could kind of do whatever you wanted. And the kind of fraternities, mostly the fraternities, were willing to give up like just so much more, um, because they wanted to win.
All right. And this is another question. What was the influence of the Bradshaw papers at the time? They still circulate today in the indie movement, but they were released like 2013-ish. They were finished 2013-ish, and that's around the time Access started.
Yeah, the Bradshaw papers, they definitely predate Access. So it wasn't like Bradshaw papers were released, people read them, started Access. I wouldn't draw that line at all. Um, so I actually didn't know that they were published in 2013. But basically, in my mind, because I came in fall of 2014, the Bradshaw papers were like something that happened in the past and were not like extremely like influential on me, um, until well, I guess they were influential in that they were the first thing that I read that helped me understand everything all at once. Um, and so they were kind of like passed around, just they're just kind of passed around. Um, and so I've talked a few times to Bradshaw. And yeah, it's always interesting because like he doesn't want them published, but he's fine with other people reading them. Because when he gave all those interviews under the understanding of like a more like a bit of anonymity. Um, and it's interesting to see how little anonymity there is in them anymore, because now everyone knows them, and like thousands and thousands of people have read them probably. And so even though that you can't like find them online, I mean, you might be able to now, but I haven't seen them online. But it's that little fun fact is always interesting to me, that he's like, oh yeah, please don't share them, or like post them online anywhere. Yeah, it's interesting.
It's interesting that you actually met Bradshaw in person. I've heard
Oh no, I didn't meet him
it's
in person. I just
oh
met him online.
oh interesting. Because I've heard they still circulate today in indie circles, the papers themselves. But I've heard from people in the indie movement that Bradshaw really doesn't like to be contacted about them, and that he just tends to like brush off a lot of contacts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh well, yeah, for sure. I mean, so I only met him because someone that was like part of one of the indie movements uh sent him some work that I had done, and then so he had read it and liked it, and then we talked. So if you're just a random person with like no new interesting information to give him, just like asking him questions about his master's thesis from 10 years ago, he's probably gonna be like, go fuck yourself. I don't want to talk to you anymore. There's no, I'm not gonna get anything. I'm not gonna get anything out of this. But yeah, like I talked to him about the online voting stuff, and I don't think I talked to him at all about like not my system things, but I shared a bunch of the data analysis and things with him. But lots of people in the indie community are just kind of nerds, and so if you're willing to nerd out with them, then uh, they'll like you, I guess.
Interesting that you mentioned Not My System. So, could you explain what Not My System was and what exactly was your involvement in that campaign?
Yeah, so the story is that there's this guy named Manny Root now, who's basically the most charismatic person on the face of the earth. And he was a part of Access Party the second year. Maybe he was a part of it originally. I forget exactly, but he is like super smart, super charismatic. Like as soon as you talk to him, you'd be like, "Am I in love with you?" Like this guy's amazing. Um, and he was like campaigning and talking to people, and he was like in Turlington or something, and then he ran into this girl named Sabrina, and then just Sabrina started just like dumping all this stuff on him, of just like, oh, I used to be part of the system, I'm so mad at it, whatever else, like yada yada yada. And then Manny was like, oh, okay. And I was friends with Manny, and so then Manny was like, hey, can I introduce you to my friend Tyler? And then so then she said yes, and then I started talking with Sabrina. As soon as I met Sabrina, I was like, hey, we should make like, wouldn't it be fun to make like a video about something like this? And then that night, or maybe a few hours later or something, I contacted Elle, Elle Beecher, who I was good friends with at the time, still good friends with. And I was basically like, hey, and the thing that Elle is really good at is she's very good at taking things and like understanding how people will interpret what is being said, and she's very good at making things popular online. Um, and just like the whole branding side of it was just something that she was incredibly good at. So I was like, hey, Elle, I think this is something that would be really fun, and I think you'd be like a really unique value add to it, because I was thinking about just doing it alone. And so then yeah, and then so then we started like talking with Sabrina, and Sabrina was like, I don't know if you've ever talked to her, she's something, she is definitely something. And I was like, all right, well, listen, this is like a firecracker. Like I'm holding onto a firecracker right now. I don't want to hold on to this firecracker for very long at all. I think we should do this in like 48 hours or something. So then over the next like 48 hours, maybe it's like a little longer than that, maybe it's like a week. We basically got a video crew to that only would do it like under the veil of anonymity. And we paid them to like create and edit this video that was basically me, Elle, our friend Austin Young, who also was like not telling anyone that he was a part of this in the slightest, because he was a pretty like apolitical type person, or at least like in terms of those sorts of politics. And then Angel, who's one of my good buddies from UF. So I brought him in because he's hilarious and really smart. And so then the 4 or 5 of us just like, you know, drafted the video, figured out like the how we wanted to say X, Y, and Z, took a few like takes in the rights. It's actually in the like it's filmed in the like prayer room in the rights. Um, fun fact, because we didn't know exactly where we could like film it without anyone knowing what we were doing. And no one was using it. And so we are like, all right, if anyone wants to come in here and pray, we will definitely leave, but we'll do this here for now. And no one kicked us out, so we are fine. And then basically, that was pretty much it. So we filmed the video and put it online. It went bananas. And by the time that like the Not My System thing was going on, I was really sure that we were going to lose. I was like really sure. I was like, oh my God, like we are going to get creamed in this election. So it was kind of like a Hail Mary type of situation in my mind, where I was like, all right, well, let's see how many like people that we can like frustrate with this sort of thing. Um, and yeah, and that was the Not My System campaign. Do you have any more like specific questions about what went on there?
So yeah, you mentioned sort of this video going sort of super viral. I remember Sabrina was interviewed by like the Cosmopolitan and like a lot
Yeah,
of big outlets, and it got like I think 100,000 views in a few days.
yeah,
Um, but why exactly did the viral success of Not My System not translate into electoral success? So for context, I think Susan Webster, the Impact president, actually won by the largest number of votes a system candidate has ever gotten. I think in history, I think she got 7.2 thousand votes.
yeah,
And they really swept. And it's interesting because 2016, the community split off from the system, and there's like a schism, and it leads to Access's victory. Well, in
or 20
2016,
2015
yeah,
2015 there was a schism. Yeah,
yeah. And in 2016, Sabrina Phillip, who's this big leader in the system and political bloc, she also splits off, but it doesn't lead to equal electoral success. So why exactly do you think Not My System didn't achieve as much success as it could have, or that like
yeah.
last year did?
So there's two there's in like the fundamentals of election science, for like voting theory, there's two variables that matter for any individual person. And you can basically say, okay, me, Tyler, there are, let's say, variable A and variable B. And variable A is what is the percent chance that I am going to vote for your candidate? And then B is what is the percent chance that I'm going to vote? And every piece of advertising can either influence A or B. And so if you are a political party or movement, the general idea is that you have to figure out which one of those numbers is more malleable and how to make that number change. And so for something like a shift for the communities have a set of voters. It's probably like, in the single digit thousands, less than that, like maybe 1,000 or 2,000, but let's say whatever, that they can basically say, hey, these people are going to vote almost no matter what. And we can tell them which way to vote. And so we can flip the first number, but we like the second number is like more static. For the average student on campus, I think the average student on campus would probably vote for indies. Maybe they're at like 55%, 60% indies or something like that. But the chance of voting is really, really low. And so that second number, so a lot of indie parties will be like, all right, my goal is to get is to increase turnout for those people. And so that is one of the reasons why people really like online voting, because it automatically picks that some second number and like shoves it up like extensively. Then the other part, so that the thing about Not My System that I think didn't work well is that it didn't resonate with the fraternity and sorority people at all. They don't that ideally what would happen is basically you'd be like, all right, the fraternity and sorority people are like, oh my God, this is shitty, I'm not going to vote anymore. But that didn't happen in the slightest. And as you mentioned, Impact was very easily able to just like have a massive, massive turnout. And they were able to do that because of like really good execution, and they had been executing extremely well. And they were extremely scared. They're extremely scared by the success of Access, and so I think basically Not My System had no impact on like the number of votes that came out uh, from the system side in the slightest. I don't think it increased, or I don't. It maybe even they felt more scared and were like, oh, we got to go crazy because of this whole Not My System thing, and then like more people came out. Um, One of the big ways that the system drums up more support and drums up more votes is basically they say like, oh, these people are coming to take away our stuff. We have all this power and we like, and this is awesome. And so they're going to go and take away these cool things that we have. And so the success of Not My System, like maybe it didn't do anything, but maybe it also like increase the fear of the system party such that they were like, all right, now everyone really has to vote. And they were able to like make sure they got all the stickers and like all this other stuff. Um, and yeah, I mean, people will go out and vote if they feel like they're going to get something taken away from them. Um, and then on the like non-system side, I mean, I just think people didn't really care about it. Like they were like, oh, that's crazy. But I don't think it didn't influence how they were, if they were going to go out and vote or not. And I definitely don't think people didn't. If anything, maybe like, the thing is, all of this is conjecture. Um, I would say the number one reason for Access's like 2016 like giant loss would have happened regardless of Not My System. I think it wasn't like, oh yeah, we were like clearly going to crush it and like win, and then got shit on. It's like no, we were getting dominated the entire campaign. It was like not looking good in the slightest. And then at the end of it, let's throw this little like Hail Mary thing. So I've kind of been droning on a whole lot, but the number one thing that I think you should take away, that in my impression of how people should take away, is that I think it is pretty unlikely that Not My System is the deciding factor in the spring of 2016. I think it is disappointing that more people didn't really care about it, but I don't think it's that surprising also.
Why do you think sort of like the average student really didn't get energized by Not My System?
Well, it's kind of like in national politics, you have like all the negative ads where you basically say, hey, they're so shitty, like, oh my god, like this system is so corrupt or whatever, and you have like all of those types of ads kind of out everywhere. Those those ads don't make you more likely to vote for the candidate that like isn't that shitty side. It just makes you less likely to vote. And so you show the the reason why negative advertising works is because it shows people that have a reasonably high chance of voting and voting for the other party. It makes that chance of voting go down. It doesn't change, it doesn't make them likely to vote for you. It just makes them less likely to vote overall. And that's why negative advertising like works. And so this is basically a massive negative ad against the system. Um, and so because of that, I don't think negative ads make the other side more likely to vote.
So
Yeah.
how important is data analysis to both independent and system parties?
So I'll start with the system side. On the system side, there's a lot of like the biggest bit of data is turnout data. And the things that are closely tracked, and there's like a pretty good operations like team for this sort of thing, is how many people from your fraternity slash sorority voted in the last election, and like what is the percent. You've got 100 people in your house, 200 people in your house. Did you get 90 people to come out? Did you get 150 people to come out? How many stickers do we have? And then that like is that information is tracked closely, and like people, I mean, just get screamed at after night one because it's tracked after night one, and then they basically say, hey, you're only at fucking 50%, like get your shit together. I don't care if you have to like get pledges to go and like drag your members out to go and vote, like you go and get those people to vote. So that operations like setup is extremely important to the system, and I view that as a form of like operational excellence in the system to be able to keep track of that many houses and that many people. And that is like the fundamental, the thing that the system is really good at, is being able to track votes and then being able to reward and punish people based on that information. So I think that is like the data analysis that is really important to system parties. Um, I think they also have a recognition of um, which seats are important and which seats are not important in the Senate, but that kind of usually matters a little bit less, just in terms of how many Senate seats exist, because for most of the elections, it's like, I don't know, most elections are pretty clear what's going to happen. There's only like a small number of seats that end up mattering. And so just understanding which seats are likely to win and likely to lose is like, you don't have to do a crazy amount of data analysis to like know that. To the independents, it basically started to become a bigger deal with access, and no one had really done a lot of like tracking of data and keeping of data and like figuring stuff out in that way until the second year of access, when I was just like, oh, it was just kind of interesting to me. And so I started messing around with it. So we started trying a whole bunch of things like, trying to see which bus stops were like most used on campus, like based on bus ridership data. And then you're not allowed to be like right next to a bus stop, but you could be kind of close when people are getting off to see like that sort of stuff we were trying to figure out. And then we were trying to figure out how many pledge cards that we had for every seat. And so then we were able to say like, hey, we've got this number of pledge cards for people that say they're like a sophomore, and we got this number of pledge cards for like the engineering seat or for Murphy or whatever. And then we were able to use those as proxies for like how well the candidates are kind of campaigning, and if they're like actually doing their part, or if they're kind of slacking off a little bit. And so if someone has like 10 pledge cards and they're like running for their freshman seat or something, which is like basically always going to go to the system anyway, but still, you can basically take the ratio of like the pledge cards and the number of people running for that seat and how many votes that you need to say, hey, you should probably double the number of pledge cards that you're getting. We started like doing stuff like that. I would say it's like medium important, but it's probably not like, even as a data person, I don't think has been a game changer in any election that I was a part of. Like, I don't think it switched from, oh, you were going to lose, and then you looked at this ratio and did this, and then you won.
So, what can you elaborate on pledge cards? I don't think that's common practice
Oh, shit. Sorry.
today.
Yeah. So basically, one idea that Access had was that if we could tell people, hey, can after you talk to someone, you like go up and say, hey, I'm running for this and this. Are you an engineer? Like, can you pledge your vote to me? Basically, hey, I want to have your, can you give me your number? Can you give me like your name? And can you give me like your major or something? And then on voting day, we would basically sit there and have hundreds of these things. And then you would text people, and just say, hey, I'm Tyler, I'm running for the engineering seat. Like, last week, we talked and you said that you were going to vote for me. Have you voted yet? Is there any way that I can like any information that you need from me about like making this sort of decision, or just kind of like traditional campaigning stuff. And so we use that both for the main reason was for turnout and to try and increase turnout on the day of election. And then as a byproduct of that, we were also we tried to create like I made these big spreadsheets with all of the pledge card information and like kept track of, made little graphs for who got the most pledge cards and those sorts of things, and try to use that to like see which spaces were doing better or more poorly, better or worse, I guess.
Wow. And do you think these pledge cards worked um, to an extent that you would say was satisfactory?
Probably. I mean, probably. I guess. I think it's the counterfactual is so hard. Um, and on the day of elections, it's really hard to know if, I mean, it's impossible to know if someone actually voted. And it's really hard to know, like, you basically want to talk to everyone that you've already talked to and say, hey, just a reminder, please go out and vote for me. And so I don't think it's net negative. How positive it is, I really have no idea.
All right. And all right. So another question is about specific trends. So
Yeah.
your article, Two Decades of U.S. Student Government Elections, has remained pretty influential in certain claims it proposes. For example, the article states an increased number of parties has a significant and negative effect on the number of Senate seats an independent party would win. However, we found anecdotally that to be the opposite. So in the graph below, there's spring 2022 presidency versus spring 2022 Senate. And in the Senate, a third party, Communist Party, actually ran that year. And it seems that they took their 5% of Senate votes mostly from Gator Party. And so, as well, in certain races last fall, independent candidates in Springs and Yulee also seem to have spoiled votes from Gator, the system party, to secure indie victories. So, do you have any thoughts on sort of these um, anecdotal evidence? Do you believe that system voters have less voter loyalty than independent voters, or do you believe this breakdown is sort of lacking in its analysis? And anyway, obviously, I'm not a data person. I just
Yeah.
made like pie charts.
No, I mean, I think it's really interesting. And it's kind of hard to say. And I think the way that the reason why it's tricky in my mind is that the way that you would actually figure this out is through the Senate, individual seats in the Senate. And if you could say that the ratios were basically, I've thought about this a bit because I like you sent me the questions before, and I think it's a really good point, and I think it's really hard. I think it's extremely hard to tell. At least, um, uh, the way that I would probably do it now is I would say for elections that had three parties, were there more Senate seats that were won by independents with a three-party group than a two-party election? And that would be kind of uh, the ultimate way of, at least in my mind, the way of doing it. Because if you just look at presidency and like Senate overall, you don't exactly know where these are coming from, because it's almost always a question, at least with the Senate, of like, hey, did they take votes in A, or did they take votes in D, in District D or something like that? And at least from the the elections that happened in the small amount of data that I had, which was basically 20 or 2000 to, or like maybe 19, I think it was like the data that I had goes like 1995 or something, whatever it was, like 1995 to 2015 or something like that. The number of independent elections were so small that even though I'm like technically looking at a pretty large data set, the number of times that there were three independent parties in a spring election where you could look at this is super small. Um, and so basically what I'm trying to say is I don't exactly know. I don't exactly know. From that data set, it was pretty clear to me that every time that there were three or more independent parties, which is a really small number of times, the independent parties got fucking crushed. And they it wasn't like, oh yeah, the like a bunch of frat people decided to vote for some random independent party. Um, and this is kind of interesting because you just look at spring 2022, and that's the most interesting one to me, right? Where spring of 2022, the presidency has um, no no other votes at all, right? And then Senate has like 5% other votes, which means that someone split their ticket, and they said, okay, on the presidency, that's the one that really matters. I'm going to vote for like the people that I'm supposed to. And like how I'm interpreting this graph is the presidency is one that really matters. I'm going to vote who I'm supposed to. Oh, now in my little election in like District A or something, which doesn't end up really mattering, or the freshman seat, which is always going to go for the Gator Party, wouldn't it be fun to vote for the communists? And then you go and you vote for there. And all the change people are like, oh, I'm going to just vote for change, like down ballot. And that is like one way of reading that. The other way of reading that is that there's like this like loyalty difference in like indie versus non-indie folks. So I think split ticket, like the fact that like 5% of people split is nuts, like relative to presidency versus Senate, because you just almost like, I don't know, I very rarely see that. I would love to see it broken down by Senate seat. Um, and that would be like, I think you would learn a lot more if you broke it down by Senate seat.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your feedback. I definitely appreciate that. And we'll certainly try to do more data analysis on that. I mean, like to the extent that we can with
Yeah, for
pie
sure.
charts and graphs.
Don't you have like, there's got to be some data science kids at UF?
Oh, Change does do their data analysis, but it's very internal, as in only the top leadership
Oh,
is
the
able to
top
access the data.
leadership can access the publicly available election results.
Yes. And so another trend that you outline in your article is a decline in indie parties over time. And what's interesting is the last two iterations of the indie parties, Inspire and Change, have defied that trend, often gaining success later in their lifespan. So, for example, Change recently won back-to-back Senate victories despite
Yeah.
being into its second year. And I think Inspire also won in fall 2019, which was a good part into its lifespan. I think that was about also 2 years into its lifespan. So do you have any thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on sort of this like defiance of the trend by the last two indie parties?
Yeah, I don't see that as a defiance of the trend that much on year or on the second semester.
Or
If it's
second
second
year?
semester, if it's the fourth semester that someone's around, then that's a big difference, because when you look at the breakdown of the how like what is their percent of the Senate that they won, like for a fourth semester independent group, it's like 10% or something, which basically means they won their 5 seats that they're like supposed to, or like maybe they won, depending on if it's fall or spring, maybe they won like the graduate seats, or maybe they won District D and then lost everything else. But they definitely are not winning like District C, which is like more of a contentious. Yeah, it's definitely more of a. If you win District C, you probably won like 20 Senate seats or something. At least generally. So I would say it depends on the year. But yeah, it's always exciting for me to see independent parties that have a more sustained success, rather than what has happened in the data set that I use, which is they pop up, they do pretty well. There's literally like 2 examples ever of people winning the Senate, or winning like a majority in the Senate for a semester. And then yeah, seeing people like sustain momentum over time is just exciting. That's the thing that I think is like important to understand about data analysis like this, is that UF is not like embalmed in like amber or something. Like UF is a changing and dynamic place, and politics are changing and dynamic. And any just because this is how things have happened in the past is not necessarily indicative that this is how it's going to happen in the future. Um, and so I hope that for all of these trends, they all turn out to be foolishly wrong. in the long term. And I like, yeah, I hope that like District A all of a sudden becomes like extremely contentious and independent parties are able to like just like do really well in District A and B. I mean, I ran for District B like while I was an undergrad and just got crushed. I would go out and I was like, because it's just basically like District B is front row. So it's like, what are you gonna do? But I hope that all these turn out to be wrong. And so I'm excited to see some of them. Like the more things that I see that are like, oh, this is not really how this works anymore. I'm like, thank fucking God, that's awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts? So Access really succeeded because of that schism between the communities and sort of the three blocks. Do you have any thoughts on like why indies suddenly seem to be succeeding despite a lack of schism? I know you haven't been at UF for a while, so this might be a bit of
Yeah.
an unfair question to ask.
No, no, no. I mean, the idea is that over the long term, um, the the clout associated with being political in a fraternity and sorority will go down. That is a long term hope. Um, and the hope is that more and more people see it for what it is, which is like both stupid and also not useful in your long term career. And so people had this belief for a while, and this used to be true, where you look at the people that were successful in independent party or not independent parties in system parties, and then they go on to do really cool things. And most of the time, you see them not anymore. Like you don't see like look at the past like five presidents or something and VPs and treasurers and just look at where they're at now. And then you're like, actually, that's not that worth it. Like that, you know, lots of them are just kind of fuck ups. Um, and so that's the hope is that everyone realizes, oh wow, this used to be really important and it used to mean something. And so people were willing to spend and do immoral things to get these positions of power. And now, being UF president means not that much relative to what it did 20 years ago. And being in Blue Key, like, I mean, just imagine like I would one data point that I always wanted to know is what is the median salary 15 years later of the engineering graduates that graduated in 1980 and the median salary of Blue Key Taps in 1980. So by the time it got to 1995, like what, like, and salary is not a good way of like measuring success in careers. So I think it's kind of silly, but just like some objective number of like, hey, if you got to pick, would you rather be a Blue Key Tap or would you rather be an average engineering student? 1980, I think you pick Blue Key Tap. Because I think there's a lot of power associated with it, and that's like they went on to do like interesting, cool things or whatever. It like meant a lot. You do that in 2020, and no way am I picking a Blue Key Tap. Now it's like not worth anything anymore. It's silly. Blue Key is just a silly institution, and everyone realizes it. It's like no, they're like this is clearly like dumb. So the hope, at least my hope, is that everyone starts to recognize, oh, I thought this was going to be like really influential in my career and my life, and now it's kind of silly and not worth nearly as much anymore. And so I'm not going to do a bunch of immoral stuff to get it.
All right. Thank you for that. And then I have actually another question. So,
Yeah.
how often do indies contact you, sort of after you've graduated? And what would you say to indies right now who are currently challenging the system?
Um, well, I know I just said that the like positions of power are like silly. And they kind of they kind of are. And I change my mind on this and on these sorts of things like all the time. But I would say that good luck. It's always fun to be a part of an independent party. I would say that it was really nice in college to have a close group of friends that were doing something that we thought was right and I still think is correct. Um, and also, it was nice to practice losing and know what that feels like publicly, um, because you end up learning a lot personally, and just like being okay with doing something that you think is right, but you have the recognition that the chance of you like really winning in the long term is pretty low, is something that is at the worst case scenario for indie parties, like a good personal experience. And in the best case scenario is you can make some influential change on campus and actually do good governance, which UF basically hasn't seen from student government, probably maybe ever. Like I don't think there's been 3 consecutive years of good governance from UF student government, like in the slightest. Um, I would say people reach out to me every once in a while. I don't know, probably once every 6 months, like something like that. So yeah, probably once every 6 months is a rough estimation, maybe more around election time. Um, and yeah, I mean I can see the read, like how many people read the like the Medium articles that I've written, and yeah, so I mean if maybe 20 or 30 people read it every week or something like that, or at least like open it. And I have no idea if like Medium is like inflating those numbers or not. They probably are, but it's gotten a good number of reads over the years.
That's very fascinating. And then last question, how has life been after UF and all the student government business?
Yeah. Well, let's see. So my life was basically I did data science related stuff at UF, and was part of the Data Science Informatics Institute thing. That was great. And I did that after I like did all the UF election stuff. And then after that, I went into like election science and I was an election scientist, and did that for a nonprofit. It's the research that I did with Dan Smith and Michael McDonald at UF. And then, so they introduced me to this nonprofit that like I was working with my last year at as an undergrad, and they actually read a lot of the UF student government stuff that I had written, and then they were like, "Yeah, I mean, we don't really need to give you like a technical interview because like we have all this work is really cool, and like it clearly shows that you know what you're doing." So then I worked for them for a bit out of New York, and that was great. I really liked them. Then I went to go and work on integrity related problems at Meta. So it's kind of like measuring hate speech on Facebook and like measuring graphic violence on Instagram, like how many titty pictures are on Instagram on a given day, and you know how are our classifiers to like yeah, remove nudity and like those sorts of things. And then a lot of that was also like kind of election related as well. They tend to hire lots of election related folks post 2016. um, so I did that, and that was great. Like a lot of the like lessons that I learned from um, like analyzing this type of data was really useful. At Meta, it was useful for getting me like extremely well-paying job with the nonprofit relative to what I was doing before. Um, and yeah, so I mean, all that stuff has been like really, really helpful for me. And then I haven't done election science related things in a hot minute, because I joined this small startup called Streamlit, and they basically make this open source Python library that makes it easy for people to create like web apps. And a lot of the reason why I like really like the product is because I spent all this time on these like data related projects, and then I had to just turn it into like basically a Medium article, and I want people to be able to play around with the data. And so Streamlit makes it really easy to do that. And so I was like, oh, I would have used this like crazy in undergrad and at Facebook. And so then I joined them, and I've been working with them ever since I got acquired by a company called Snowflake for like $800 million last year. So now I work for Snowflake.
All right. Thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate you for your time. Let me end the
No
recording.
problem.